Hello, my name is Livio and I'll present you a short lecture on the cardiovascular system on behalf of Schneider School of Pre-Medical Studies. Now the contents of today's lecture are going to be the overview on the thoracic cavity and mediastinum, the architecture of the heart, and an overview of the cardiovascular system. Now let's define the cardiovascular word. So the cardiovascular word is composed of two other words. It's composed of the word cardio, which stands for heart, and vascular, which stands for blood vessels. So the cardiovascular system is composed of the heart, the great blood vessels that come to the heart and go away from the heart, and also the collateral vessels. The collateral vessels are the vessels that arise from the main vessels of the body. Now, the heart is the main part of the cardiovascular system, stands in the center of it, and it acts as a pump. What does that mean? That means that the heart gets all the blood from the body and pumps it away towards the body itself. Now, the heart is located within the thoracic cavity of the trunk in a section called mediastinum. Now, I'm gonna stop a bit on the thoracic cavity and explain this notion to you. So the thoracic cavity, also called the chest cavity, is the second largest hollow space of the body. It is enclosed by the ribs over here. You have the vertebral column in the back of it. You have the sternum, which was removed here, but I'm going to show you in a different picture, but you have to imagine it that it's in front of everything you see here. So in the anterior part you have the sternum, and is separated from the abdominal cavity, which is in this white part of the picture, by a muscular part. It's called the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is the inferior border of the thoracic cavity with the abdomen. Now, the thoracic cavity contains many of the important organs of the body. So you get the lungs, the right lung over here, and the left lung over here. You get the heart in the center of it. You get the main vessels, the blue ones over here, the major veins. I'm gonna talk about them in a bit. You have the aorta over here, and you have the pulmonary trunk. Don't worry, we're going to talk about it, each and every one of them, in the future slides. So these are the major and most important organs in the thoracic cavity. But as a subsection of the thoracic cavity, you get the mediastinum, in which the heart stands. So you have this part over here, the center part of the thoracic cavity that I'm gonna outline with my arrow, and it's called the mediastinum. Now let's move to another section of the thoracic cavity, and you look at this picture as you would look at the body from the side. You look either from the right side or the left side, and what you see here, you have, this is the back part of the body over here, the posterior part. This is the anterior part of the body. And as I told you, the thoracic cavity and the mediastinum is bordered in the back of it by the vertebral column here with the thoracic vertebrae. So the vertebral column is composed by the small part over here called vertebrae, and the thoracic part of the vertebral column borders the mediastinum. In the anterior part you get the sternum with its three parts: the manubrium, the anterior part, the sternal body, and the xiphoid process. The upper part of the mediastinum is bordered by the first rib, and the inferior part by the diaphragm, by the muscle that I told you. It's the limit between the thoracic cavity and the abdomen. Now the contents of the mediastinum are in the middle part of it. You get the heart with the vessels, and in the posterior part you get the trachea and the esophagus. The trachea that goes to the lung, and the esophagus that goes from the pharynx all the way to the stomach and goes through the diaphragm. In the superior part of the mediastinum over here, you get two very important glands. It's the thyroid gland, the inferior part of the thyroid gland, and also the thymus, which is very important for immunity in kids. But we're going to talk about that in the endocrine section of the course. Now let's move to the orientation of the heart. So the heart, as an organ, has two very important parts. You have the base, which is in the superior part of the heart. It's called the base. I know it's in the superior part of the heart, but it's called the base, and I'm going to explain you why in a picture. And the apex in the inferior part of the heart, and also while the heart is in the center of the thoracic cavity, the apex being projected slightly to the left. This is why you feel the heartbeats on the left side of the body. Now, the base, it's also the apparent origin of the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, the major vessels. I'm going to explain you what apparent origin is on a future picture. Now, the heart, you can imagine it as a grenade-shaped organ. It looks like a grenade if you look at it. And it has a base in the upper part and an apex over here. And as you can imagine, in this picture over here, this is the base of the heart, and this is the apex. So it's from the center but slightly projected to the left. Now, as I wrote on the slide, the base of the heart over here is the apparent origin of the big vessels, the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. The apparent origin means that these specific vessels go, you see them arising from the exterior side of the organ. So you see, it's like there is where they start, on the exterior side of the organ, but actually they arise from the inner part of the heart, from the core of the heart, from the cavities over here. So the red over here, the red vessel over here, the aorta, goes from the left ventricle, and the pulmonary trunk from the right ventricle. So this is the real origin. We're going to talk about the ventricles, the cavities of the heart, and these specific vessels in a bit. Now, moving away to the architecture of the heart, the second part of the lecture. So the heart is it consists of three different layers. From the exterior part of the heart all the way to the interior part of the heart, you have three different layers that go one on top of the other. So you start with the pericardium on the exterior aspect of the heart. The pericardium is a composed word. It's composed by peri, which stands for exterior, right? So it's the exterior side of the cardium, which is the heart. Now, the pericardium is the outermost layer of the heart over here. But the pericardium itself is built by three different other sub-layers, let's say. So you get the parietal pericardium. This is like the magnification of what's going on over here. So in this specific picture, you get the heart, and you also have the pericardium showed over here as the outermost layer of the heart. And now the pericardium has the parietal pericardium, the green layer over here, the most external layer. And the parietal means wall. So it's the part of the pericardium in direct contact with the thoracic wall. Then you have the pericardial space here. This pericardial space is very, very thin. And it's in it you have a very, very thin layer of liquid that renders the movement between the innermost layer of the pericardium, the visceral layer, on the parietal pericardium when the heart contracts. So if you wouldn't have this liquid and the visceral layer would rub on the parietal layer, then the pericardium would rupture. Now the innermost layer of the pericardium is the visceral pericardium. The visceral pericardium, as the name states, it's the layer of the pericardium in the most intimate contact with the heart. The word visceral means organ. Every time you're going to hear visceral in the body, you think about organ. So it's the layer of the pericardium in direct contact with the organ itself. Here is another representation of the pericardium as a pericardial sac, as you call it. So it's a sac that contains the heart in it. And here is a magnification, and you also see the three layers of them. The white one is the parietal pericardium, the pericardial space with the fluid, and the visceral layer over here. This is another representation. As you see it better, you have the three different layers of the pericardium. And the last one is in direct contact with the middle layer with the myocardium. This is why it's called visceral, direct contact with the organ. Now, as a clinical tip, as I told you before, in the pericardial space you have fluid, right? That fluid can increase. And it can increase in a variety of situations. For example, if it gets inflamed, if it gets infected. There are specific bacteria that affect the pericardium, and as the pericardium becomes inflamed, you're going to have buildup of fluid in the pericardial space. Now, apart from the fluid itself, you can also have blood if you have trauma of the heart. And because the fluid increases in the pericardial space over here, you look at the difference between this heart over here and this heart over here, and you clearly see that with the buildup of fluid, the heart becomes compressed in the pericardial sac. This is why when you have an increase of fluid in the pericardial sac, the heart cannot expand anymore and cannot function as the pump that I told you is the major function of the heart, to function as a pump, that is to receive blood and to pump blood. So if it cannot receive it, if it cannot distend sufficiently in the pericardial sac, then the heart cannot pump blood to the body. Now, the critical state of this buildup of fluid is called a cardiac tamponade. You might have heard about it. What do you do when you have a cardiac tamponade? Cardiac tamponade means that the heart cannot expand at all. You have such an amount of fluid there that the heart cannot expand at all. So what do you do then? You drain it. You go inside with a syringe and a needle beneath the ribs, in between the two layers of the pericardium, and you drain the fluid. Now, moving away to the second layer of the heart, it's the myocardium. So again, a composed word. You have the word myo, which stands for muscle, and cardium, which stands for heart. So myocardium is the muscle layer of the heart. Now, this muscle layer of the heart over here is the thickest one of the three of them, and it stands between the visceral layer of the pericardium over here. This is the anterior aspect, and here's the interior aspect of the heart, lined by the endocardium, the innermost layer that we're going to talk about in a bit. So this myocardium is responsible for the two of the most important functions of the heart. So the contractility function, which is the pump function of the heart, and the excitability function of the heart, which is the property of the heart that renders it reactive to the electrical stimulation. Now, this part of the heart, the myocardium, is directly nourished by the coronary arteries of the heart. Now I'm going to explain you what the coronary arteries are, where they come from in a bit. But what you have to keep in mind by now is that these arteries are the ones that supply the myocardium with blood and oxygen. Now the myocardium has two different types of tissue. You have the contractile tissue, which renders the contractility function of the heart, and the excitable tissue, which renders its excitability. Now here is the representation of the contractile tissue formed by the muscle cells, these weird shaped cells, like star-shaped cells, that are strongly connected between them by the intercalated discs. Now the intercalated discs, the word intercalated means in between. So there are discs formed by the cells themselves in between them. Now these discs that you can see over here as well, here and here, so are like very strong adhesion, very strong communication between the cells, and they they allow the heart to contract all at once. So when this, for example, cell contracts over here, this cell over here is going to contract as well. So the whole heart is going to contract as one. In these intercalated discs, you're going to have the gap junctions. The gap junctions are like channels in between the cells that allow the movement of ions in between the cells. So the cells are going to be stimulated by the electrical stimulation all at once. You probably remember by the gap junctions from the cell bio lectures. Now, the myocardium, it's responsible for one of the most impressive and one of the most dramatic clinical states, if you might call it. It's the heart attack. It's the very powerful chest pain that elderly people, not only old people, get. And the reason why the heart attack appears is that because the coronary arteries, as you remember, I told you is the arteries that supply the myocardium with blood, get blocked. And they get blocked by a variety of things, especially by this atherosclerotic plaque, but we're going to talk about them in the future. What you have to bear in mind now is that these specific arteries get blocked, and then the part of the myocardium that they nourish with blood is going to die, and it's going to become necrotic, and it's going to give the pain that you have in the heart attack. Now, the endocardium lines the myocardium and the valves in the interior part of the heart. So it's the innermost layer of the heart over here. So you think about this picture as, here's the anterior side, here's the interior side, here you have the visceral layer of the pericardium, here you have the myocardium and the endocardium. So the endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart, and it's only formed by a single layer of cells. They're called endocardial cells, and they line the cavities of the heart, and also the first part of the big vessels that come and go away from the heart.